Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to my greenhouse. My name is Joe. I'd like to take you along today on a most amazing, incredible visit that I recently was able to make to a place I know quite well from having lived and worked there in the past. It is one of my all-time favorite cities and countries in the world, Singapore. And I'd like to take you along to the Botanical Gardens of Singapore. Again, one of the most breathtaking, amazing botanical gardens I think that exist on this planet. And one of the unusual things, because we are after all in a fully tropical setting, we're only about, I think, 150 or 160 kilometers north of the equator, 70 or 80 miles north of the equator, fully tropical. And yet, in this botanical garden, there is a fantastic display of cacti and other succulent plants. And we're going to take a look today at which plants and how they actually grow them there. So welcome back and welcome to today's visit to the Singapore Botanical Gardens and specifically their collection of cacti and other succulent plants. And here we are at the Tanglin Gate, the beautiful Tanglin Gate entrance to the Singapore Botanic Gardens, which go back to 1859 and which was awarded a UNESCO World Heritage Site status in 2015. That makes it one of only 3 gardens in the world to have this UNESCO World Heritage Site status. In fact, the only one in a tropical setting. And it's a wonderful, large garden covering over 80 hectares. That's over 200 acres of land. And there's so much to see and do. It is definitely worth a visit. There's not just wonderful plants and especially also trees to admire. There's beautiful landscaping with lots of water, lots of art, and it comes as no surprise that this garden is also a key recreational and especially touristical destination and attraction. There's over 4.5 million visitors coming to this garden a year. The Singapore Botanic Garden actually evolved from being a former British tropical colonial botanic garden to a modern world-class scientific institution focusing on conservation and education. And as I said, a key recreational and touristical destination as well. There's over 10,000 species of flora to admire, and actually, talking of size, the linear distance between the northern and the southern ends of the garden is around 2.5 kilometers, or what's that, 1.6 miles. There's also lots of really cool free-roaming wildlife to meet and enjoy, like this almost 4-foot monitor lizard searching for some juicy breakfast. If you can, come here on a weekday early in the morning, and the atmosphere is just absolutely magical. Later in the day, and then especially as you can imagine on the weekends, it does get relatively busy. But due to the size of the gardens, that really isn't so much of a problem either. The majority of the garden has free entry and is open daily from 5 in the morning to midnight. Only the embedded and truly amazing National Orchid Garden, that requires an admission fee.
Just next to one of the most iconic landmarks of the gardens, the bandstand gazebo built in 1930, there's a wonderful plot of orchids. The hybrid climbing orchid Vanda Miss Joaquim, which was chosen as the country's national flower in 1981. What a contrast to what we'll see in a moment. Tropical orchids wonderfully growing next to arid zone cacti. So we're making our way towards the main focus of this video. We're going to take a look at the cacti and other succulent plants which are grown here in a special part of the garden called the Sun Garden. Hey everyone, we're in the Singapore Botanical Gardens and I'm standing in front of the cactus and other succulent section. It's the Sun Garden as it's called here, and we're going to take a look today at some of the plants that are in cultivation here that are being shown to the public at this absolutely stunning and wonderful botanical gardens. And that's a relatively modern addition to the historic over 160-year-old gardens. It was established in 2004, so what's that, 22 years ago now, with the purpose of showcasing a collection of sun-loving plants originally from sunny, hot, arid environments. So cacti and other succulent plants, which of course are a real contrast to the wonderful tropical vegetation elsewhere in the garden. And it is really quite a feat to be growing these desert plants in an environment, in a hot and humid environment like the climate of Singapore. And one has to say the main challenge, of course, for growing these, or at least many of these plants, is mainly twofold. One is the constant, very high humidity with almost year-round monsoon rain. And the other are the constantly relatively high temperatures of around 27 to 33 degrees centigrade, and especially with a relatively little contrast between daytime and nighttime temperatures. So not much of a drop between those maximum and minimum temperatures. And that, of course, is a challenge, or can become a challenge, for many of our desert plants, because they of course rely on a mechanism called abbreviated CAM, crassulacean acid metabolism. That's a mechanism which actually normally allows these plants to perform their main photosynthesis at night when temperatures cool and when the plants can open their stomata or pores in the outer skin, their epidermis, and that's a mechanism which allows them to very successfully adapt to the normally hot, dry, sunny environment that they have evolved in. And so in order to preserve water and humidity inside these plants, the stomata are closed during the hot days and they open at night when the main photosynthesis sets in. But in the absence of that strong contrast between day and night, that can of course become a bit of a challenge for some of these plants, although the effects of course vary from species to species. But we'll take a look in this video at some of those plants that are actually doing really well here. But I've also noticed a couple of plants here where I'd say they're probably struggling in these conditions a little bit, although the way that they're being grown, and there's a nice contrast between growing them outside in the full open tropical climate versus a little trick that's being applied here by the gardeners in the Singapore Botanic Garden growing these wonderful plants, and we'll come to that in a moment. There are several beautiful specimens of the spiral or twisted cactus, Cereus forbesi, forma spiralis, and this one in particular had a wonderful flower, at least a bloom from the previous night, and I think this plant is doing very well. It's a nice and empty weekday morning, but I can guarantee you it won't be very long until the first tour groups arrive. Luckily, cacti don't usually seem to be a huge attraction here, certainly nowhere near as popular as the orchids that draw huge crowds every day. Now, I'd like to first of all take a look especially at the plants that are growing outside of the open greenhouse, which is the glass roof for protection from the rain that you've seen just now already. So out in the outdoors, there's wonderful hechtias, fantastic looking hechtias growing, and also a wonderful selection of different agave species. But let's take a look now at the golden barrel or ball cactus, Echinocactus grusonii as it's known to most of us, and interestingly it's labeled here with its actually valid and most recent scientific name, Kroenleinia grusonii, believe it or not. I actually checked back and it is indeed the valid name since 2014, so no longer Echinocactus grusonii, now Kroenleinia grusonii. Anyway, looking at these specimens growing outside, I'm not convinced that they're actually doing too well. They're not looking great. None of them are actually in bloom or flowering, although I'd guess that they are probably large enough and mature enough to be doing so. Maybe during another time of the year, I don't know, but I couldn't actually see any hints of any flowers or blooms from the past. In general, they're not looking too great. The epidermis only seems to be a fresh green towards the top, the central stem, but the sides are looking quite dull, and I'm not sure whether it's from some fungal infection or some other pests. The plants look stressed and not super happy to me. And we'll see a contrast later on when we look at some of the plants that are actually growing under that glass roof, protected from the almost daily monsoon rains here. Now this is of course a great marker plant in a way, because Echinocactus, or sorry, Kroenleinia grusonii, normally grows in originally in Mexico in pretty dry, arid, full sunny conditions. And as I say, I'm not sure that this humid climate is something that is that this plant is really super comfortable with. There's a huge specimen of the Agave desmetiana. A nice group of Agave potatorum, the butterfly agave. They are looking really healthy, they're looking really good. And equally the group of Agave filifera, the thread agave, I would say they're looking pretty healthy, they're in very good condition. There's quite a selection of beautiful agaves that are actually all looking very well. Now, another group of succulents thriving in this climate are the Euphorbia that are actually planted here in the garden. These are species preferring slightly wetter growing conditions. This one didn't have a label, but it looks to me like a Euphorbia nerifolia, the Indian spurge tree, which forms beautiful shrubs of up to 3 to 5 meters in height. And there's a real mini forest of Euphorbia here. The native distribution of the Indian spurge tree actually spans all the way from Iran to southern China, and it loves subtropical to monsoonal climates. There's a Euphorbia trigona in the background, and some wonderful Euphorbia poissoni These are variegated cultivars, the variegated candle plant. There's a label of Euphorbia obesa, interestingly, the baseball plant, but no plant. Looks like it has disappeared, either stolen, which is rather unlikely here in Singapore, or deceased. In my view, more likely given the challenges that plant would probably have with the humid climate. A really cool codex plant is Jatropha podacrica, the Buddha belly plant or coral plant, originally from tropical Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua. Again, it's a succulent herb with a swollen stem base, also known as a caudex. This has a very toxic white milky sap or latex, like a lot of euphorbias. And I can always only stress, when handling euphorbia plants, be well aware of the toxicity of that white milky sap. If you do actually get it on your skin while handling these plants, wash off that sap as quickly as you can with lukewarm water ideally, and just make sure that you don't get it especially into your eyes. Those injuries can become very, very nasty very quickly. Now look at this fantastic, huge euphorbia. It's in full bloom. I'm not entirely sure which euphorbia species it is. There wasn't a label. Maybe it's Lactea, I'm not 100% sure. But it's the beautiful blooms, the Cyathea, that are so attractive, not just for me, but especially for all the ants here, because these Cyathea, the flowers of these euphorbia, they have nectar glands, and so that's what attracts ants, and they're having a feast here. Look at this wonderful forest of euphorbia. A very unusual looking euphorbia is aluaudi. Euphorbia aluaudi, or Madagascan fire plant. It is very closely resembling the well-known pencil cactus Euphorbia tyrocali, which of course isn't a cactus, it's a euphorbia. But this pencil cactus or pencil plant is of course a very ornamental, beautiful plant that can be found very frequently in our living rooms. But this one here is in full bloom, and again attracting loads and loads of ants. But look at these beautiful little flowers, not very frequently seen when we're growing these plants as house plants at home. Another beautiful euphorbia is Euphorbia resinifera, and that's one from Morocco. This is Poissonii, Euphorbia poissonii, a variegated form. And this is the well-known desert rose Adenium obesum. A beautiful specimen of Adenium obesum, the desert rose, sometimes called impala lily. It's of course a plant from western tropical Africa all the way to the Arabian Peninsula. Such an absolutely beautiful flower. And this plant seems to be doing really well here. Then there's a whole group of different prickly pear cacti, Opuntias. There's Opuntia microdacis, Opuntia rufida. These are actually prickly pear cacti from the southwestern United States and Mexico. There's a couple of beautiful aloes. This one here is in bloom, and they're looking very good as well, as I would expect them to. Wonderful kalanchoe, and then a very special plant, again something that you might know from your living rooms, and this is actually the elephant foot tree or ponytail tree from Central America, and the scientific name Nolina recurvata. So a wonderful codex, and look at the size of these plants. This one has been leaning over and has sort of started to grow back up vertically again. On its trunks, there's some really amazing little succulent plants. I'm not sure what they are. They remind me a little bit of some of the Australian succulent plants I've seen in a book recently, but I'm not 100% sure what this is. So if somebody out there knows what this succulent is called, it's an epiphytic succulent, it seems like, then, just comment, please. Beautiful Nolinas. Look at these plants. This is Ledebouria, Ledebouria socialis. There's actually 2 or 3 different species they're growing here, and I find it very interesting to see how the plant actually sticks to the shade of the plant beds. This one is in bloom. It's got a beautiful little flower. It's also called the wood hyacinth or Leopold lily. Here's something quite special as well, which you might also recognize from your own supermarket plants. And look at the beautiful patterns on these leaves. Here's a nice collection of different sansevierias, some beautiful, very broad-leaved ones as well. And they, of course, are really enjoying this climate, I think. Now, talking of climate, it's now 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and slowly it's getting darker, and it looks as if we are about to get a monsoon rain shower. And sure enough, here comes the rain. Enjoy a real Singaporean monsoon downpour. Very, very impressive, I can tell you. It's 4 in the afternoon. We've just had a incredible
thunderstorm, a real tropical thunderstorm, as you know, normal here obviously in Singapore. And that, of course, here, especially now during the rainy season, that happens on a daily basis. So it's not exactly the climate that you would associate with xerophytes, with plants that, you know, come from arid zones, from desert zones. But nevertheless, the botanical gardens are actually growing a wonderful selection of succulent plants, cacti and others. And we're going to take a look now at some of the plants that are grown here. Let's go.
To be precise, we're going to now look at those plants that are actually growing under the sheltering glass roof and basically inside this open greenhouse with its ventilators at the top, the big fans which create, you know, wonderful air movement, and also, of course, help dry the air and the plants much faster than they dry outside where they're growing exposed fully to the climate. There's some newly planted Pachycereus columnar cacti here, quite beautiful. I'm expecting those to do quite well here as well, and I think they actually have wonderful large nighttime blooms. Oh, let's go back to our Kroenleinia, the Echinocactus, the golden barrel cactus that we've looked at before. Now this specimen growing here in this sheltered environment looks a lot better in my view, and I think that just reflects, you know, the slightly drier and rain protected setting that it's getting here under the glass roof. The agaves themselves, they do also look very good, but I'm not noticing that big of a difference to those outside. The Sansevierias, in fact, I think are doing better outside. Here's a Clesitocactus, and this is a wonderful specimen, really good looking, and I think, again, you know, this is a cactus that is enjoying the slightly protected, certainly rain protected setting that it's got here under the glass roof. There's various quite good looking other succulent plants like these portulacras. Again, a columnar cactus, the toothpick cactus Stetsonia corina that we've seen growing outside, and there's a couple of specimens growing here. I would dare to claim that the ones growing outside actually look slightly healthier than the ones growing here, interestingly. In fact, here's a specimen that not only looks stressed, it looks like it's deceased. Here's a couple of other cacti, Gymnocalyciums, Mammillarias. There's a few Echinopsis that I can recognize, more Mammillarias. They're not looking too great, but I think this is just the general challenge I mentioned earlier with cacti having to grow in a climate where there's virtually no or very little difference between the temperatures during the day and the temperatures at night. Here's a spiral cactus. The ones we saw growing outside, again, to me actually looked slightly better than the one here or the ones here growing under the protected roof. A lot better off are the Espostoas growing here. Espostoa melanostella, they have a couple, and yeah, I'm guessing that it's way too wet outside, because it's not just about the air humidity, but it's also, of course, about, you know, how long the substrate remains humid and waterlogged, and, you know, is there any time at all between the different rain events for the substrate to dry. Here, and we can see a couple of aloe veras here. Here under the protecting roof, of course, the waterings are determined by the gardeners rather than by the local climate, and that of course can be very helpful for many of the cacti. Here's some very good looking agaves that we've seen growing outside as well, but I think these more sensitive variegated forms of Lophatella, they are probably really doing better under the protected roof. So I guess it's a bit of trial and error that one has to apply. There's some Euphorbias. We saw them growing outside, doing quite well. They are here as well, and it seems to me that in this slightly drier setting, they actually have a lot more blooms, and they're looking more natural, kind of, dry, shrubby, compared to the very dark green looking specimens outside in the rain. Here's a nice Euphorbia milli hybrid, wonderful variegate Ciatha. Mainly Thailand hybrids of Euphorbia milli or millii that are really wonderful plants to look at. More Euphorbia geroldi. It's a close relative to Euphorbia milli. Beautiful. Adenium in flower here. And a couple of Pachypodiums, Pachypodium lemeri and others, and they too are actually looking a lot better here under the protecting glass roof. A couple of Stapelias that are growing here. Again, I think it's more of an experiment. Some of the individual plants are looking okay. Here's a Euphorbia marsa bloctensis, which is a difficult plant to grow in any case, but this one has obviously deceased. More Pachypodiums looking quite okay. Bucorosia, we've seen this one before, quite attractive succulent plant. More Euphorbia milli, the Trigona that we've seen growing outside. Actually, it's a cultivar, a red-colored cultivar. In my humble opinion, the ones growing outside look better than the ones growing here under the protecting glass roof. It's a wonderful, wonderful selection of succulent plants that's been assembled here, that's for sure. We're back outside from the glass greenhouse now again. There is a really special type of cactus plant growing here as well. In fact, there's 2 or 3 species. Now, look at this tree-like cactus. First appearance, it might be mistaken for a Opuntia stem, but it's not. Look at these bundles of spines that are appearing from the areoles. What an armor and defense, very mean looking. And to me, the ultimate heavy metal cactus. What we're dealing with is a super interesting plant, especially evolution-wise for the family of Cactaceae, the cacti. This is a plant that it's labeled as Pereschia bleo. Its most recent name is Leonbergera bleo. More importantly, in the past they were thought to be ancestors to the rest of the cacti. Most recent DNA analysis has actually shown that this is a plant that is not an ancestral cactus, so not an ancestor of all our cacti, but it's actually a very early sister to all of our other cacti. And so It's a plant that pretty much at the onset of the existence of the family of Cactaceae, the cacti, and that was sort of back in the mid-Miocene, roughly 16, maybe 15 million years ago. And at that time, a subfamily, so a sister of the rest of the cacti as they evolved, was developed. And it's this lineage that has brought forward these 3 or 4 species belonging to the genus Ledebouria. They're tree-like, they're shrub-like. Unlike the rest of the cacti, we have very little stem succulents here with these plants. Instead, they actually have very woody trunks, so their stems are fleshy only for a very short amount of time, and then they develop these woody trunks. These plants are leaf-bearing. They lack the stomata, but they do have areoles and spines. Really unusually formed features. These are actually not buds, these are fruit. And look at the leaves. This is what the actual buds look like, and here we've got the wonderful flowers. Look at these beautiful blooms that this cactus actually produces. A little reminiscent of Opuntia flowers, but they're a separate subfamily within the family of cacti. In a way, a bit of a dinosaur, if you like, of the cacti, except that, it's not extinct, it's still living here, but it is like a living fossil almost, within the family of the Cactaceae, the cacti. I find this truly fascinating. Well, that slowly takes us to the end of our expedition to the Sun Garden here in the Singapore Botanic Gardens. A last stroll past some absolutely majestic, amazing trees, and also some beautiful plants, some of which are in wonderful blooms. And we're slowly making our way back through the garden to the gate. And that concludes my visit to these wonderful gardens in Singapore.
Now, what do you think? Isn't that amazing? Cacti and other succulent plants. These are, of course, as you all know very well, plants that thrive in desert conditions, and for them to be growing in a fully tropical setting like Singapore, quite amazing. And I hope you enjoyed this visit to the Botanical Gardens of Singapore as much as I did. It is one of my favorite places in this city to be visiting. And any visit I've been to Singapore for, I think, at least once that I've gone to see the Botanical Gardens. And take your time, because it is huge and there is so much to see and so much to do. So, if you are short of time, 2 hours, I would say, is the minimum. If you have a full day, take that time, because it's worth every minute. I've put together for yourselves, by the way, a part 2 to this video. So during my visit to the Botanical Gardens, I also visited a very unusual, fantastic little greenhouse setup that focuses on Hoyas. Hoyas are, of course, also highly specialized succulent-like plants, and they rarely feature in botanical gardens, and when they do, they're usually somewhere in glass houses, and there's not too many of them usually. Singapore Botanical Gardens has put together an incredible collection of Hoyas in an open greenhouse, given the fantastic climate that they, of course, have. And it's a recently opened venue, the Hoya House of Singapore Botanical Gardens, coming up on this channel in part 2 to this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this trip today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a like. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please do so. It would be a great way of supporting. And it's also a fantastic way, of course, of always getting notifications automatically of new videos being uploaded to the channel. All you need to do is click the bell icon next to the subscribe button and you'll have those free automatic notifications. Anyway, that's it for today. Checking out from tropical Singapore. Well, I wish I was there, but as you can see from the background, I'm here in my own little greenhouse back in Bavaria, Germany, and nothing, compared to those tropical temperatures, of course. Yet, I hope to see you very soon again. Until then, take care. Thanks for dropping in today. And as always, happy growing.